Firstly, I really, really, really enjoyed watching the show. I think
Oh, you had a look. You've had a watch.
I've had more than a watch. I've watched it all, and I just thought it was
Oh,
really, really fantastic for so many reasons. It felt really familiar but original, you know? And yeah, I'd never had a show aligned with the young person's perspective like solidly throughout. And yeah, it was just really incredible to watch as someone who's been through similar situations, but I think any young person could watch that and really connect with it because it covers so much. Um,
that's really nice of you to say. I love it when TV critics say nice things about it. And I love it when people who work in TV, who I really respect, kind of say nice things about it. But the thing I love more than anything else is people who have had those experiences or have been in those situations when they see something that sort of feels like what they've been through. That means more than anything. So I'm really grateful to you for watching it and for enjoying it and getting something from it.
yeah,
Thank
definitely.
you.
And I mean, like you can instantly tell, like within the first 10 minutes, that it's kind of written by someone who's kind of walked in Johnny's shoes, but also has been like thoroughly, it's not just from one perspective. You can see that it's been well researched, and there's been a lot of in the pre-production phases of talking to other young people and kind of hearing their experiences. I mean, how did you find that balance really of, sharing your own story in a way that was comfortable, but then also, reflecting other elements of grief in so many other ways of, not just someone dying, but people being absent or, relationships breaking down.
So the very first version of it was my story of my dad dying, and what it was like. I was 15 when my dad died really suddenly. And I've sort of wanted to tell that story for a few years. And that's where I started in my head. And it was kind of more a story of what happened to the boy who it happened to and his family. But then, and this happens a lot in television, and sometimes when it happens, it's kind of, well, I'm not sure about this, but on this occasion, you take an idea and you start talking about it with people, and you suddenly go, oh, and we could do that, and he could have friends, and we could sort of tell a coming of age story from lots of different perspectives. And because I grew up watching sort of John Hughes films, kind of Ferris Bueller and The Breakfast Club, we were sort of spoilt with films like that growing up. And I loved those. And I thought, well, if we can do something a bit like that, our sort of version of that, and tell loads of different stories about what it's like growing up now, then that would just be amazing. So wanted to kind of keep my story as the sort of central spine of it, but the chance to tell all those other stories was just really exciting and sort of too much of a good opportunity to not grab.
Definitely, like it all intertwines so naturally, and it feels really natural how it progresses and how things unfold. And yeah, it's weird because I think when I first watched it, I mean, all the music in it, the soundtrack for the whole show, brilliant, really
It's
coming of
yeah,
age, And I think initially I thought, oh, is this set kind of like 80s, 90s, like because of that and like Johnny's bedroom? And then it was kind of like, oh, okay, everyone's got iPhones in their hands, so probably not. So I thought that worked incredibly well for it all together.
cool.
And it really, for me, felt like it highlighted how kind of rubbish adults can be during a time where a young person's grieving.
So true.
And I think that's something that only when you're young you can really relate to, because it does feel like you're just having a load of adults tell you that you need to grow up and get together and you need to step up now, and it's kind of like that's the last thing you want to do. And it resonated with me so much when Johnny just kind of turns around and like, I don't want to grow up. Was that a kind of overall message that you got from young people? Was that more, did it just pan out that way?
I think, you know, Jonny's story is really, really close to my own. And so a lot of what Jonny experiences and a lot of how Jonny reacts to it is the way that either I did react or the way I wish I'd reacted. So, you know, when he gets angry and he loses it, I know what that anger is, and I know exactly where that comes from. And, you know, that bit you mentioned where he says, I don't want to grow up. I've already had to grow up and I didn't want to. So don't tell me to. I remember feeling that at the time that it happened to me. And I've kind of never sort of lost that feeling a little bit, because we know, don't we, if you experience, you know, any form of loss or grief when you're a child or a young adult, you're forced to grow up in a way that isn't natural somehow. It's kind of, you know, there's no sort of gradual learning, and suddenly, if it happens suddenly, and it did to me, you know, the world is completely different and you're completely different and people treat you in a completely different way. So Jonny's, as I say, Jonny's story is kind of, you know, where I was. So that was easy. Well, it was easy to write and it was really hard to write, you know.
Yeah.
I kind of found bits of emotion from my own experience that I'd either forgotten about or not realised were there. And I'm so pleased that I've done it, because it's probably one of the most kind of therapeutic, cathartic things I've ever done. And, you know, I've done like decades of counselling and therapy and stuff, you know, and actually kind of writing those elements of Tell Me Everything, really allowed me to kind of tap back into those sort of emotions. You know, I still feel, even though I was 15 when my dad died, my mum was already ill, and she died a couple of weeks after my 20th birthday. And I, in some ways, I feel like I've never quite got beyond that age range in my head. And I'm sort of pleased about that, because that's made me the person I am. And, you know, I'm sort of creative and a bit daft, and, you know, I like playing. You know, for me, my work is playing, really, and that, I think, sort of comes from those experiences.
I think that's exactly like what I felt watching it, and like how it struck me for whoever had written it at the time. And it felt like that element of growing up so quickly, but then also you're clinging on to that youthful side. And like you said, that kind of I'm the same. I mean, humor has been kind of the only kind of saving grace of, you know, my brother dying and like my best friend passing away like a few months after that. And watching the funeral, it just brought back a lot of how I remember I was reacting. I came out of my brother's funeral, I turned to my best mate and I went, that went on ages, didn't it? Do you know what I mean? And like everyone's looking at me like, what are you, like, how dare you say it? And it's like, no, I can say that. If anyone can say that, I can say that. And
You're so right.
it was so refreshing. Right. I used to feel so alien for feeling like that. And I think at that age, it's very difficult for anyone around you if they haven't been through it. You know, one theme that stands out throughout the show is obviously friendship, and how much young people do step up for each other in a way that adults aren't able to and can't relate to, and they don't know the ins and outs of what's going on. I mean, talk to my younger brothers and I'm not up to date with everything that's going on, like, and it's that language of how they speak to each other. Was that a important thing to kind of develop in the show, and to kind of maybe in a way, you know, segregate the adults kind of versus the young people?
I think what we didn't want to do is kind of make the adults sort of baddies, you know, because they're not, are they? They're well-meaning. The adults in our life when we're younger are well-meaning. They generally kind of want the best for us. But like you said earlier, sometimes they just don't get it right. They give you really sort of contradictory sort of advice, don't they? you know, you shouldn't be doing that and you should be doing this. And sometimes you look at both of those things, you think, well, that can't possibly work, can it? Where, you know, what should I do? You know, I really do think that they are trying to do their best. So you're right, it's our friends usually who are the ones that can be there in a way that other people can't, even if they don't understand it themselves, even if they don't sort of know what it's like themselves. The funeral in episode 1 of Tell Me Everything is so close to my dad's funeral. It's even filmed in the church when my dad's funeral was. And that sort of happened by accident. I didn't tell anyone that it was that church. And then suddenly I got the kind of the call sheet and it said the locations. And I kind of went, oh, okay. You know what? It was so lovely. It was really, really lovely. But like, I remember my mum saying, because our house, the door was always open and kind of people came around all the time and just the house was never empty really. And so lots of my friends knew my mum and dad really well, and, really got on with them. So my mum said for the funeral, do any of your friends want to come? And if they do, or do you want them to come? Invite them. So loads of my friends and their parents came. And then like in the evening, it was right in the middle of the summer, my mum gave me a handful of money and said, why didn't you and your friends go to the cinema? And we did. And one of my friends had like a cousin over, and I ended up getting off with this cousin in the back of the cinema like all evening. And so that, even though it's a bit,
how true to life that those events were.
well, it didn't play out quite as it happens that way, but I did pull at my dad's funeral, and and that's kind of, I was 15. And you're thinking about all that stuff at that time, and yeah, your dad's dead, but you're still 15, and so I wanted, and I know that in the program that kind of does shock some people, kind of.
And I watched it and found it, hilarious, and it cracked me up that it almost turned into, it's your dad's funeral, but Jonny almost turned it into a social event of like, right guys, like, come, like we'll have drinks and like and trying to get a date for it and thinking, oh, can I get lucky? And it is that sense of having to face up to that really like drastic life event that some people won't go through until halfway through their lives, but then also clinging on to that youthful side. I mean, like, I had this very forward thing of, I don't want to miss anything. I don't want to miss these teenage years, and I don't want to miss all this fun and like the nice stress, the stress of, oh, who am I going to go out with, and like who fancies this person and who's friends.
That's the thing, isn't it? Because you're like, when you lose someone when you're young, you're already different. You're already kind of a bit weird, aren't you? Because you're the kid whose brother or dad or mum or whoever has died. And like, sometimes I didn't mind that weirdness and that difference, because sometimes you kind of felt a bit special. But other times, probably more of the time, I kind of felt, I don't want to be weirder. I don't want to be more different. So I still want to do all the things that I feel like a 15-year-old should be doing. You just want to fit in. You don't always want to be the kid whose person has died.
It is really challenging because I feel like it's very I came across a term a few years ago, and it was like shattered assumptions of kind of like, you're still forming worldviews and opinions, and what you think and feel and how you react to things.
Yeah.
And then this happens, and it's when the way that Jonny's grief is shown on screen is, it fluctuates and it's all over the place, which is very true to life. It's all together and then nothing, and then
it's
all
messy, isn't it? It's a mess.
Exactly. But not being able to experience things from a kind of innocent perspective, I guess, from that kind of, people die when they're old, or bad things happen to bad people and good things happen to good people. And in the show you can see that he's fluctuating through that.
It's just there's no straight line to it, is there? And I think everyone's experience is pretty much unique. yeah, we all go through things that are kind of follow patterns and sort of have similarities to what other people go through, but your grief and your mental health struggles are yours uniquely. And I think obviously people like therapists, of course, they there's so much work and research goes into kind of developing ways that seem to work with people to help people, and they're great, and so lots of them do work, of course they do, but sometimes people just sort of buck the trend a little bit, don't they, and sort of it doesn't follow that nice kind of neat line. And yeah, I think we just tried to show Jonny's kind of general mental health struggles in the kind of rawest, messiest way possible. It's not glamorous, is it? Having a panic attack isn't glamorous. Not being able to sleep isn't glamorous. Kind of freaking out about stuff isn't glamorous. It's often pretty horrible. And that's kind of what we wanted to show, really.
With so much going on anyway, I was 15 when my brother died, so it was very like in the midst of school and like going off to college and like uni. Like, do you think young people have kind of enough space to grieve?
That's really interesting. I don't know. I mean, it's just so different for everyone, isn't it? Because like when I look back at when my dad died, in some ways I did have loads of space. I did have loads of space, and I had a lot of freedom, which was usually great and sometimes not great, because I went a bit wild. But then my mum's health started deteriorating, and I ended up sort of being at home an awful lot, sort of helping to care for her. So it's just different for everyone, isn't it? I get a lot of people, especially since the show's come out, asking me for kind of my advice on, especially when they know young people who've sort of gone through it. And the thing I always say is the thing that I kind of felt about what happened to me, which is that, there's no right way or wrong way to grieve. As long as you're keeping yourself safe, you sort of have to be allowed to do what you need to do. And if that's talking about it, and that's great. If that's not talking about it or talking about anything but it, then it's that. If that's laughing about it or finding, making jokes about the person that's dead or the fact that they're dead, like you said earlier, humor, I call it like a sanity valve, and it's the thing that's probably saved me more than once in my life. Then that's what you've got to do. If you need to cry about it, that's what you need to do. If you need to kind of, have a few days where you just go a bit sort of mad, as long as you're staying safe, then that's what you have to do. If you need a few days where you don't see anyone else and you're in a dark room, that's what you've got to do, isn't it? It's got to be what works for you and when it works for you. I suppose what we tried to show was that, like you said, in the midst of his dad dying, not only is his mental health already sort of not great, but he's also living the life of a teenager. He's still trying to get an education. He's still part of a family. He's still part of a group of friends. He's still got hormones, and he's still kind of fancying people. So you've got to do, kind of what feels right, haven't you?
I think it was that young people's humor at the funeral compared to obviously the older people. I think when Jonny was stood with the vicar or priest or whatever you call it, like it really it resonated. I was just like, do you know what, I wish I had someone to have a conversation like that with on that day, because it was so boring and like so like just not how I wanted to remember my brother. And like Jonny said at the funeral, that's not how he remembered him. And like you said, it's so individual, isn't it? And that's the conflicting thing of it. If you're surrounded by people who are telling you, oh, this is what he was like and this is how it happened, and it's like, no. And I think it was really beautiful, when you did have those scenes of kind of, Jonny obviously having those conversations with his dad, like in his head, or and you do, and you know, I think until you are there, you will always look at it with a bit of a, all right, like, yeah, if it makes you feel better, but it's so very real.
You know, that scene where Johnny's going, who's he talking about, when his brother's talking about the dad. And I'm fascinated by that, how, because I remember that with my own sort of siblings, kind of talking about our parents and just thinking, who's that person you're talking about? I don't remember them being like that at all. And it makes you realise that we all have our own version of that person, don't we? What's really weird about us having this conversation today is that last night, for the first time in years, I had a dream about my parents. And it's, you know, maybe my subconscious is going, oh, you're going to be talking, you know, about this stuff tomorrow, who knows. But I realised that I was in a place that I knew really well, but I'd gone back in time somehow. And I've seen people, some of whom aren't around anymore, not my parents, and people that are still alive that look totally different and look younger. And I thought, right, I know where I am, but this isn't now. And I sort of, almost as if I'm in a film, I tried to subtly find out when this was, you know, kind of, what day is it? And they said, oh, I never know what day it is. And then they said it was April 1992, and my dad died in July 1992. And I suddenly went, oh my God, I can go and visit my parents. I can go and see them. And I remember just feeling like this mixed emotion of, oh my God, this is incredible. And also, I don't know, it's going to be weird, isn't it, seeing them? And then I woke up. So I didn't actually kind of see them in the dream, but, you know, it just, you know, my dad died 31 years ago this year. And I think about him every single day, and I can see him and hear him really clearly. My mum was alive for almost another 5 years, like 4.5 years after, and I can see and hear her less clearly for some reason. But it never goes away, and I'm really pleased about that. I don't ever want to lose them inside me, you know, whether it's my heart or my head or both. I don't ever want to not have that little bit of sadness about them, because it helps me remember them.
And I think that sadness is almost a superpower. I mean, I hate to even say it, because I think if I'd have heard that when I was 15, I would have really lost it and been like, how? And even when people refer to, you know, time being a healer, now I get quite like, you know, it's like you want to move on, but then moving on means that you feel like you're leaving them behind. And I think I'm, you know, at the point where it is that sadness that, you know, you have to remember will kind of always be with you. But is that a bad thing? I mean, it's only been like 9 years for me, but it most of the time it doesn't feel like I haven't seen my brother for like 9 whole years. It feels like, you know, he's very close by, and, you know, there's something somewhat beautiful about having someone on the other side kind of guiding you. And there have been so many occasions where it could not have been anything else but that, you know, when really worried about seeing a certain family member, because we always used to go and see them together, and it's like I see someone in front of me walking with a football shirt with his name on the back, and it's like, wow. You know, or it's so many examples, but, you know, it, and suddenly you're like, in the grand scheme of things, they're there somewhere. So
I think you're right. And, you know, like you said, whatever that is, you know, whatever the explanation or lack of that is, it sort of doesn't matter, does it? Because it's a comfort. You know, I don't have much stuff of my mum and dad's, but I have a couple of things in the house, and just having them here, you know, sort of being able to show my own, I've got 2 teenage kids myself, being able to show them those things is such a comfort. It's so nice, you know, and I don't ever want to not have those things. And it's just another example of sort of doing what you need to do, isn't it, to sort of get through and believing what you need to believe.
Just had a really good question and it's gone out of my head. Oh, it's something about being young and people dying.
This conversation, that's odd.
Yeah, I know, sorry to bring it up, it's a bit no, I mean, I just really enjoyed, I wish I could have watched that show at 15 because I don't remember watching anything really that I could relate to.
Yeah.
I mean, in general anyway. Thanks for having like gay characters on the show and like it not being like a massive like big like thing, and like actually addressing, you know, racism and like how subtle and, you know, yeah, I just think the points were just very relevant to what we're going through in the world right now and what we're seeing, and yeah, it was refreshing.
I'm really pleased that you feel like that about the show, because, you know, and I've sort of said this in a few interviews, that in some ways nothing's different to when I was a teenager. In some ways, like, nothing has changed. You know, people are still trying to find out who they are and what they are, and, you know, what part they're going to play in the world, or what the world's going to have in store for them. But the big difference is technology and social media. That's the change, really. Yeah, I spoke to my own kids, and we spoke to lots of other young people. And, you know, the cast were great because they're all young themselves, you know, so they gave us a really good steer on things. I'm so pleased that you think it sounds right and it sort of looks and feels right, because that was really important to us.
Yeah, and I think for young people, you know, anyone ranging between the ages of, you know, say 14 to, you know, up to my age, you know, 24, 25, it's able to access these really serious and really difficult topics in a way that, you know, it wasn't difficult for me to watch. It was nice. And for that's quite a challenge to, you know, cover some of those topics, and you do go back there and you think about things, but it definitely wasn't in a sad way. It was definitely in a, well, I'm glad that this side of grief is being shown, you know, that raw, messy feel to it and the complexity of it. You know, if you were to do more episodes, what would be some of the key things that you would maybe want to touch on again, or new things?
Yeah, I think, you know, if we get to do more, there's so much to explore, you know, in terms of things that are going on for young people. Like, every day I'm sort of shocked or surprised by, you know, something new that's kind of going on, or a new issue, or something else that's happened, you know, not always in a good way, obviously, because we don't hear about the good stuff nearly as much as the bad stuff. So there's so much to explore. I was just going to ask you, you know, you asked me before what is the message I wanted to sort of put across in the first series. What's the message you got from it, if you got a message?
Kind of, it's funny because I when I watched the first episode, I just made some notes because I'm a TV nerd and that's what I do. And I put this show's accessible for grieving young people who aren't looking for a sugar-coated "it's okay not to be okay" sentiment. But then thinking back, that last episode, it does almost give off that sentiment, but not in that patronizing. You know, I liked almost how, I think in the first couple of episodes, anytime someone asked Jonny, you know, are you okay, it was a sarcastic answer, or kind of like, because what a stupid question. Why do we do that? We all do it. Like, yeah, we're all guilty of it. And, you know, I think you touched on, you know, people coming to you for maybe advice, or, you know, when I have friends who have gone through similar things suddenly, or like, I feel like, right, okay, I'm going to step up and I should know what to say. I'm saying just the stupid things of like, oh, well, you know, let me know if you need anything, or, you know, it's like, it does, you know, really highlight that difficulty for all of us, but so that like you said, even with the adults not always getting it right, they do just want to help, and also showing how difficult it is for those adults. If it's difficult for those adults, then, you know, how difficult is it going to be for someone still learning about themselves, let alone having to then process that? It is so true that, like, you know, everyone's all got their own kind of baggage and like stuff to deal with, but it did also like convey the power of kind of young people supporting other young people. And, you know, that's why we're having this conversation, because, you know, Winston's Wish is doing exactly that. And I think it does knock down a few barriers if you do have other young people trying to connect with other young people, because it's relevant and you don't feel like, you know, they know how you're going to talk, and they, you know, you don't feel as judged maybe. Yeah, that would be the message for me. How great it is to be young and grieving.
What an exclusive club it is.